Hello, Dr. Scrivner.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Of
Um,
course.
I didn't read the entire book, but I did skim through it, and it's really good. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, I really liked you have a lot of. I mean, I ended up looking up the scientific experiments and stuff that you mentioned, and some ideas that I was not very familiar with. Um, you, I mean, you did a great. So the book is kind of like a first person experience, and you talk about like going to places with paranormal experiences, but you also mention a lot of science that I was not aware of. I was expecting more of a book, kind of like, oh, I am a fan of mystery movies and scary movies, and it was not that. I heard you on the Hidden Brain, which is one of my favorite podcasts,
hmm
um, and that was pretty excellent. I do have some questions that I want to ask you, but please introduce yourself, introduce the book, and we can take it from there.
Sure. So my name is Coltan Scrivner, and I'm a psychologist and researcher who studies the psychology behind why people are fascinated with things that are sometimes frightening or disgusting or dangerous or otherwise aversive in most situations. And so I have a new book out that came out a couple months ago now called Morbidly Curious. A scientist explains why we can't look away. And it is sort of a culmination of, I would say, the past 6 or 7 years of research that I've been doing. Uh, there's a lot of sort of new theoretical advancements in there, new research that I think, like you said, a lot of people aren't familiar with or don't know about, and sort of synthesizes a lot of different areas of research to try to explain our attraction to the macabre.
Yeah. This is live, so if you have questions for Dr. Scribner, please feel free to ask. So your background is actually in anthropology, right?
My undergrad is in anthropology, yeah, but
Oh,
I have a master's degree in forensic biology and then a PhD in uh, technically comparative human development, but my lab or my focus was behavior biology.
right. And the way I found you is you have actually come up with a research scale for morbid curiosity.
Right.
So, yeah, that was very interesting. Are you? I know you did. I believe you did 3 studies verifying the scale. Are you aware if people are doing research using your scale yet, or?
Yeah, so there's several people who have used it that have published. There's probably more that have used it that aren't yet published, but I know there's some that have used it with music, so music containing violent themes. There's some that have done it looking at true crime and interest in true
Mhm.
crime. It's been translated into a dozen or so different languages.
Okay.
Some of those have been published, some haven't yet. I know the Chinese validation was published. I think maybe a Portuguese validation was published. Um, so yeah, I mean, people are starting to use it. It's just one of those things that it's slow because there aren't a lot of people who study this,
Right.
and of course, the publication process itself is can be a little slow.
Yeah, the reason I actually first looked it up was I was trying to understand. I don't know if you've even heard of this. I hadn't heard of this until I encountered it. There's a internet phenomenon called lol cows.
I don't
Uh,
think I know that. What is
yeah,
it?
so it's people who are considered to be cows, as in resources you can go back to
hmm
milk
hmm
for lulls, for laughter.
Okay.
And so basically, what um, it's kind of the Jerry Springer phenomenon, but on the internet, where
Mhm.
these people have followings of some people they just put their life out on the internet, and
Yeah.
then they have like cult followers who just follow their lives.
Yeah.
And when I found out about this, I'm like, okay, I need to look into the peer-reviewed research. And there you were. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, one of my questions, and you kind of addressed it already, is it just fear, or is it also disgust? Is it all the negative emotions? Like, what's going on there?
So at the core of it, it's about things that could harm you, right? And so those can be things that do produce, often are things that produce fear. They can be things that produce disgust. They can be things that produce other negative emotions like shame.
Mm.
But typically it's fear simply because it's about things that are a danger to you or could threaten you or harm you.
Okay, so I mean, this this thing of looking at, the Jerry Springer type of stuff, right? Um, I so you gave four categories that you said um, morbid curiosity falls into. One, minds of dangerous people, which makes a lot of sense. Two, physical violence, which also makes a lot of sense. Three, bodily injuries, which, yeah, I can kind of see that. And then four, paranormal dangers. And I was like, okay, now that's something else. So could you explain where paranormal dangers fall into this?
Yeah, so that category captures an interest in things that are typically obscured from our understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and in part because of that, we find them potentially threatening. So,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to think of ghosts as dangerous rather than friendly. We tend to think of extraterrestrials as aggressive rather than being our benefactors, and we tend to think of other sorts of gods and deities often as angry or potentially threatening. Um, there are exceptions to that, obviously, but our tendency is to believe that these things that we can't directly see or directly interact with uh, are uh, threatening to us, potential dangers to us, and so that's what that category captures is an interest in things that we don't quite understand and that we think may be dangerous.
Yeah, I had heard one explanation which Jordan Peterson talks about, and it's kind of a Jungian thing of the paranormal is really our abstraction of things we don't understand. You
Hmm.
know, kind of like a chimera of multiple things into one. Is that do you think that's what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that's similar. Yeah, I think it's sort of you I could have just as easily called it curiosity about the unknown, right?
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think it's things that are not unknowable, but again, difficult to ascertain. And we
Mhm.
tend to think of those things as dangerous because when agentic beings hide themselves from our view, they tend to do it for nefarious means, right? So a stalking predator tends to hide because it doesn't want to be seen. Even a true crime, like a serial killer, tends to hide in plain sight or hide their aggressive tendencies. If you see someone who's peeking around a corner, they're more suspicious than somebody who's standing in broad daylight. And so, a lot of the cognitive mechanisms that go into understanding intentions of people and things that stalk and hide go into trying to understand things that again uh, seem to obscure themselves from our view, like ghosts or aliens or deities or demons or any number of what I broadly would call paranormal
Mhm.
phenomena.
Yeah. And another thing you mentioned in your book is that people seem to have this idea that maybe being morbidly curious shows some sort of moral failing, etc.
Mhm.
And you actually found that to be kind of the opposite.
Yeah, so there wasn't much research on this, probably because people have strong intuitions about it, and so sometimes for those things, people don't look into them empirically. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, I did a series of studies looking at interest in horror, entertainment broadly,
Hmm.
and empathy. So empathy both affectively and cognitively. So how do you feel what other people feel, and do you understand their points of view or understand their positions? And as well as compassion, which is a slightly different, related phenomenon where you care about someone's well-being. And
Mm.
what I found is that uh, across the board, horror fans were not lower in empathy or compassion. In fact, they tended to score a little bit higher in compassion and, in some measures, higher in cognitive empathy as well.
Yeah, I would think somebody who's interested in psychological thrillers and stuff would likely have a stronger theory of mind, etc.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And to even enjoy a horror movie, you sort of have to empathize with the protagonist, and you have to care about their well-being. Otherwise, it's not as interesting to you. And so, on its face, the whole horror fans have no empathy thing didn't make a lot of sense because horror kind of requires you to have empathy in order for it to work, in order for it to be interesting, in order for it to be scary. You have to empathize with the people who are in danger in the story.
Yeah, I don't know if you were able to do this discreetly, but I do wonder if there's a difference between the horror that I mean, I personally have always found movies like Leprechaun and Elm Street kind of comical more than
Hmm.
genuinely scary.
Hmm.
I find things talking about actual serial killers, etc., that to be more genuinely actually frightening to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there a distinction to be made there?
Uh, sure. I mean, there are with a lot of things. When it comes to empathy, there didn't seem to be a big difference. It didn't really matter if you were, because I did look at subgenres. So I looked at the paranormal, I looked at psychological thrillers, I looked at slashers, I looked at more body horror, and there really was no statistical difference between those when it came to empathy or compassion. The only thing I saw was that people who scored high, who were more interested in particular in the paranormal genre,
Hmm.
did score even a little bit higher in measures of empathy than the average person and than the average horror fan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any clinical implication in terms of like actually telling people, hey, why don't you watch horror movies, etc., that might be, a, an act, something that I might be able to take into clinical practice?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of clinicians already use things like this when they use exposure therapy, or they use even types of cognitive behavioral therapy, depending on what they're trying to treat. But yeah, I've written a bit about, including in the book, about how horror appears under certain circumstances and for certain people to help them with their anxiety, and in particular, it seems to help with generalized anxiety.
Hmm.
Um, and there's starting to be more research about that now. I mean, the research I cite in the book is mostly the empirical research, the clinical research is mostly from a game called Mindlight, which was developed to help treat anxiety in children,
Hmm.
and in particular, generalized anxiety in children. And Mindlight is I think you could pretty cleanly argue a horror game. It's about a kid who wakes up in a dark mansion and there are shadowy monsters around, and he has to get his grandmother and escape the mansion.
Okay.
It's a pretty basic plot for a kid's horror game. Um, the catch, of course, is that Mindlight is a biofeedback game, and so it measures brain waves associated with anxiety.
Hmm.
And when the kid starts to feel anxious, for example, if they're approaching one of these monsters and they have to kind of shine their mind light on the monster, if they
Hmm.
start to feel anxious, the mind light, which is like a flashlight, will actually start to dim, and it makes it more difficult for them to defeat the monster. And eventually, an interstitial will pop up on the screen and say, "Hey," it'll remind them some tricks, some CBT tricks for regaining your cool, and sort of reminding you that this is just a game and you can overcome this. Here are some tricks to do this. And once the headband detects that the child has calmed down, the interstitial will go away and the mind light shines very bright. And this allows them to advance through. So it gives you sort of positive feedback as well. Um, but yeah, there's some research that's I think it's under review right now, not from me, but from some other researchers looking at true crime and feelings of anxiety before and after watching it, and are people more likely to watch true crime when they feel anxious, and then do they feel better the next day when they do that? So people are starting to look into this a bit more.
One concept you brought up, which I didn't really, I mean, I guess, so I'm a MSW student, and I'm actually hopefully going to graduate soon, but my classes really haven't really talked much about the biological aspects. And you brought up prepared learning, which was actually, I was surprised that I hadn't really encountered it in human psychology much at all. And so could you explain more about prepared learning and how it applies to human beings?
Yeah, I think most of us are familiar with it, even if we don't call it that, right? So, for example, language. We tend to be prepared to learn language, right? Humans don't really have to try to learn language. We don't have to go to school to learn how to speak. We have to go to school to learn how to write and learn how to spell, because those are not biologically prepared things. But language, speaking language, seems to be grammatical, like learning grammatical structure seems to be. There are other kinds of biological preparedness when it comes to fear that humans seem to have. So we're not innately wired to fear snakes, for example, but we do learn to fear snakes very quickly and more easily than many other animals. And so one of the studies that I talk about in the book has to do with learning about predators, learning about things that could harm us, animals that could harm us. And children seem to remember information about harm when it comes to an animal much better than they do information about diet or, the environment they live in or other kinds of things like that. So they seem prepared to learn about the dangerous parts of animals. And that, again, probably extends to learning about the dangerous aspects of the environment or plants or foods or all kinds of things, because those are incredibly consequential if you don't learn about them quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. We did have a few questions. Let me see if I can find them. People were started asking. Question: what trends on social media would the professor say are driven by morbid curiosity recently?
A lot of them. Anytime social media algorithms, they're a little better about this now, but they still do this. They tend to amplify things that cause people to react emotionally very strongly, and that can be positively emotionally, but often it's negatively emotionally. Often anything to do with politics tends to rile that up, because they tend to be framed in a very threat-oriented kind of way. I would say mostly political stuff online is probably driven by morbid curiosity, but there's a lot of other stuff as well. I mean, there are obviously videos of violence that circulate online on all platforms, and they tend to get a lot of clicks, a lot of shares, a lot of views, and that trains the algorithm that those things are things people want to see, and so it shows more of them. Anything to do with threats, which tends to be a lot of things on social media.
I mean, this is, I would ask it more generally, but do people end up becoming surgeons, etc., because they score higher on morbid curiosity scales?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it would be difficult for a surgeon to enjoy their job as a surgeon if they weren't somewhat interested in bodily injuries. It would be difficult for a mortician to enjoy their job as a mortician, or even ever go down that route, unless they had an innate interest in that. Doesn't mean you can't also have intellectual interests in it, but certainly it's driven by morbid curiosity as well. And a lot of people who I meet, like when I was on my book tour, huge portion of the people who came to the book talks were nurses, firefighters, police officers, people who had jobs that might indicate that they would be a little more morbidly curious than the average person.
Have you found there's a gender difference between males and females?
Not a big one, and not like you would expect. So there's a bit of a gender difference between men and women when it comes to some of the subscales. So men are a bit more interested in the violence subscale, women a bit more interested in the minds of dangerous people. The other two categories tend to be about the same, and overall, morbid curiosity tends to be about the same. So there's really not a big difference between men and women when it comes to morbid curiosity. Some slight differences in specific kinds, but not in the overall trait.
Does it vary in as a person gets older, develops, etc.?
Yeah, it tends to go down as you age, which makes sense if it's about learning, right? You can only eventually you know enough about something, it becomes a little less interesting. The benefits stop outweighing the cons of learning about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it tends to peak when you're a teenager, young adult, and then at a population level tends to decline pretty steadily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm guessing I know your answer to this one, but should I be concerned if I think my child has morbid curiosity?
No, that's probably a normal, healthy thing for a child to have. Kids are sponges, right? Like they're just soaking up all the information they can, and so it's reasonable to be concerned about that because you may not want them soaking up that kind of thing that they're curious about. But it's actually good that they are exposing themselves safely to things that are scary when they're young, because that's when they can best learn some of the emotion regulation skills that they'll need to handle feelings of fear and feelings of anxiety when they're adults. So I would say you shouldn't be concerned. You should, allow them to nurture that curiosity in a safe way.
Yeah. I mean, one thing you explained in your book, which hopefully, I mean, my audience has heard enough, is that we as human beings have a capacity to learn through our imagination and through storytelling, which is kind of our special power as unlike other mammals or animals in general.
Yeah, particularly when it comes to dangerous things, right? Those are hard to learn firsthand, and they carry a pretty big risk with them. And so being interested in them in a fictional or even a non-fictional but mediated sense, like through film or books or oral storytelling, is perfectly normal. In fact, it's better to be interested in it that way than in person, because it's much riskier to be interested in it in person.
So you mentioned that game. As parents, would you say would you recommend watching scary movies with your kids? At what age? What kind of what do you think about that?
I think that you should encourage your kids to challenge themselves, and there's a lot of ways to do that, not just through scary movies, for example. That's a good way to do it. It's a way that some kids are sort of inherently drawn to, but just like any trait, morbid curiosity varies, right? So some kids are just not going to be as interested in those kinds of things as others, and some will be a lot more interested. Just like some kids are more extroverted than others, or more introverted, or more curious or less curious in general. I would say let your kids follow their curiosity where it takes them, and if it takes them to something like that, then sit down and watch it with them, and don't make it feel too taboo, but also don't show them something that you think is too much for them. Just like you wouldn't, if you have a 5-year-old, you're not going to give them linear algebra and ask them to solve the problem, right? You're going to give them something that's for their level. And I think the same is true of scary play. But I think the real benefit comes from emotionally challenging yourself. And there's, again, many ways you can do that. One of which is engaging in scary play through scary books that are made for kids, like Goosebumps, for example, or scary TV shows. Like when I was a kid, that would have been like Scooby-Doo or Courage the Cowardly Dog, or again, scary movies made more for kids. I think that's perfectly normal and even healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I keep on getting questions that I kind of feel like you already answered. Morbidly curious people are not people you should be putting on a list.
Well, I think that brings up a good point, though, in the sense that there's some famous serial killers, for example, who were certainly morbidly curious. Jeffrey Dahmer is probably the most obvious example. He called himself morbidly curious. He had some interests that resembled that, and he probably was. But then the question is, well, did he do what he did because he was morbidly curious? The answer is probably no, right? Because there are millions of people who were morbidly curious that don't do those things, and so in Dahmer's case and in many other cases of violence, people are driven by other psychopathologies typically.
Yeah. Right now in my practicum, I'm actually working with a lot of people with schizophrenia, and I mean they tend to a lot of paranoia. Would you say that kind of overlaps with morbid curiosity? Is it similar? Is it different?
Yeah, I think it does overlap, and that's something that it's a research area that's pretty ripe for investigation. But certainly paranoia, right? Like a fear that people or other things are sort of scheming against you or might harm you. That certainly overlaps with morbid curiosity. But there's just simply not enough or any really work on, for example, even schizophrenia, just generally, and morbid curiosity. So I think there's just so much low-hanging fruit that would be really interesting to study. That would be one of them.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw your scale, I was kind of like, well, yeah, this is something we need in order to do this research at all. So I was a little surprised you had pretty recently. I mean, when did you publish your scale?
It was in 2021, I believe.
Yeah, so it's only been like 5 years.
Yeah.
And it does seem like it's something, almost in assessment, you would kind of want to ask your clients. I mean, not that our assessments aren't dramatically overlong, but there seems to be a lot there in terms of research, which I'm kind of surprised wasn't done before.
Yeah, I a lot of people had spent millions of grant dollars asking what happens to someone if they're interested in these things, right? So in the sense that like violent video game research, for example, tens of millions of dollars spent on that question. And the result seems to be that, well, it doesn't seem to make you more violent, right? Fine. That's I think but that people never asked why are they interested in it in the first place. They just asked what are the consequences or potential consequences. That I think asking why people are interested in that in the first place can tell you a lot about upstream behaviors, upstream causation, or maybe when it does lead to bad outcomes versus when it doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people just never ask the question, really.
Yeah. I am not afraid of black cats, but I do like them. Can morbid curiosity show up in our relationship to our dreams, more nightmares, or no dreams at all?
Yes, I have a chapter in the book on dreams, and I'm certainly not a dream expert at all. But I did start looking into the research on nightmares and on not just nightmares, but threatening aspects of dreams. Because you can have a dream that's not a nightmare that has aspects of threat to it. Just like you can have a movie that has a villain, but it's not a horror movie. And, I haven't done the research myself on like, do morbidly curious people have more nightmares or more threatening aspects to their dreams? But some people have looked at, like, if you're in a more threatening environment, do you have more threatening aspects in your dreams? The answer seems to be yes. A lot of this work came out of COVID, for example. Do the threats in your dreams tend to be specific to the kinds of threats that you face? Maybe. There's some research from an anthropologist in the 80s who's working with a small-scale society, and he found that men tend to dream about threats that they face, and women tend to dream more about threats that they face and are unprepared for on a daily basis. In this particular society, they were really good for studying dreaming because they had a cultural a feature of their culture was that they would tell each other about their dreams as soon as they woke up. It was just like something they did. Um, and so it made them a great population to study for dreaming.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering like if parents are more likely to suddenly have um, you know, these types of curiosities, um, and if there's a biological link between being a mother and giving birth, and hormonal links. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Hormones mediate most of our behaviors in one way or another. So
Hmm.
it'd be kind of surprising if there weren't changes to the types of things you were interested in, or the types of dreams you have, or the types of things you fear, even.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I no pun intended, but did you find comorbidities with morbid curiosity? And I mean, he's asking about
ADHD.
ADHD or autism. Anything
So
with the DSM?
so I haven't looked at anything with the DSM. I would love to. I mean, the only thing I have looked at is anxiety, because that's kind of the route that my research took. And I did find that people who are more morbidly curious are more likely to be a little more likely to be higher in anxiety, both self-reported and using some basic clinical measures for anxiety. Not a super strong correlation, but there is a small positive one, and it's consistent. It shows up over and over again.
Hmm.
I don't know about ADHD. Anecdotally, I would say probably higher with autism spectrum disorder, I would think.
Hmm.
And I don't have a good explanation for why. Again, that's just anecdotally, so it could be wrong as well. But that would be such an easy study to run, right? Like such an easy study. Again, low hanging fruit to look at these super interesting questions that would shed light on not just morbid curiosity, but maybe the phenomenon of autism or of ADHD or schizophrenia, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, if your scale was just being, as an assessment was being run on a large population,
Yeah.
and you could just mine that data, it might be an
Yeah.
absolute gold mine.
And it wouldn't be the scale itself is not diagnostic of anything. It's not a clinical scale. So it doesn't, there's not a cutoff for, you're too morbidly curious or not morbidly curious enough. It's a descriptive scale, much like a personality scale, Big Five or something like that. But it could shed a lot of light on diagnostic scales and maybe why people score a certain way or don't.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And it's a short scale. It's 24 questions. It takes maybe a minute to fill out. And so it'd be easy to add on to these large scale studies.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I just doing assessments in my practicum. It's just we end up
They're long.
asking so many questions.
Yeah.
The
Hundreds and
idea,
hundreds of questions. Yeah.
yeah, the idea of adding another 24 questions is kind of
I
daunting.
will say again, in my experience, having done this with thousands of people at this point, people tend to enjoy taking this scale because it's kind of fun. The questions are interesting. They're not like questions that you see on other psychology scales. A lot of questions are, I think, in some ways similar on psychology scales, and and these questions are pretty different, and so people tend to enjoy it a lot more, and they report that back, in person and online. It's a fun. I think it's a fun assessment to take.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually wondering, like,
It actually breaks up the mundaneness of answering like a Big Five scale or any scale that's got 50 or 60 questions that are kind of all related in some way.
I'm just wondering if it might not become one of those viral, get to know yourself more things that everyone is constantly taking.
It has at certain points. So I have it on my website, and I just put it on my website because I was getting asked a lot for it. And so I just put it up there as a simple way for people to take the scale and kind of see how they score compared to some baseline scores that I have from studies I've done. And it's probably been taken 120,000, 130,000 times. So not viral in the millions, but certainly more than your typical online scale for academic purposes.
Have you been crunching those numbers? Did you get any additional? information?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't for the the first 50,000 people, I didn't have any additional questions on there because I wasn't doing it for research, and I'm still not. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't have IRB approval for it. I'm not trying to publish anything from it, but I can look at it and it gives me intuitions about things that could be interesting to study. So, I've started adding questions about age and sex and um, sexuality, like sexual preferences. Um, and there's some interesting stuff in there. For example, in the data that I have, and this is probably from about 60 or 70,000 people, people who report being either gay or bisexual or score higher on morbid curiosity.
Really?
Yeah, which again, anecdotally, intuitively, kind of checks out. That has been my personal experience, just interviewing and talking to hundreds or thousands of people about this kind of thing. Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers offhand, but it was, even certainly on that sample, but even on a smaller sample would have been a statistically significant difference between those two. And I think, small to medium effect size, just eyeballing it, replicated the age finding that you see in research, replicated the gender, mostly non-findings from gender. It tends to be normally distributed. It's a very messy sample because it's just an online free thing. So like people are taking it in their second or third language. There's 20,000 people from France that have taken it. So it's it's a very messy sample. Wouldn't be good for publication, but again, it's really good for driving ideas about research.
Do you have grad students and stuff, or have other researchers reached out to you for collaborations, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, often I get questions about collaborations or about advice on topics for doctoral dissertations or master's theses. And depending on what I've got going on, and depending on if it's something I think I can contribute to, I still like to get involved where I can.
Yeah. Are you a clinician yourself, or just doing research?
No, I'm not a clinician. Just a research scientist.
Okay. Yeah.
But I've collaborated with clinicians who are interested in this topic.
Yeah, I was impressed with the scientific rigor of the stuff, of your publications and stuff. Unfortunately, you don't always find people as rigorous as the stuff that you published. So I highly recommend your stuff.
Thank you.
I kind of regret not getting a chance to completely read your book before the interview. So how did you get interested in this line of research?
I was in grad school and kind of just fell into it. I mean, I was interested in lots of different things related to behavior biology, I guess, broadly. And one of the first questions that I got really interested in and thought I would pursue was why people are interested in violence, and why violence is such a common form of entertainment across cultures, across history, despite being something that we also punish legally in almost every society on Earth. Right. And so I started out doing some eye tracking research on violence and where people were looking when they were inspecting violent scenes, and what that meant about how they made sense of it. And then, I started thinking about people's emotions when they were viewing images or videos of violence, and, fear comes up a lot. And I started thinking, well, people scare themselves a lot for fun as well. Yeah. And so I reached out to a guy, Matthias Claesen, who's an English professor in Denmark. And I reached out to him because he was the only person even asking that question about why do we scare ourselves for fun? And he's an English professor, and ended up doing a multi-year collaboration with him as a grad student, where I would go to Denmark and we would do research at haunted attractions there. And so over time, those two areas of inquiry kind of just morphed into morbid curiosity.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering, like, why theme parks and stuff aren't, or even movie studios might, should actually be hiring you as a consultant.
They have. I've done a little bit of that with theme parks and with film and TV shows, and not as much as I would like to, because it's really fun. I mean, it's cool to like see it applied in the real world, I guess. But yeah, no, I've done work with studios on TV shows and on films, and with we did this really cool consulting project, Matthias and myself and a few other people from his lab, for I believe it's a Swedish theme park, and they had like an overnight sort of horror themed thing, and we helped them design it and set up research questions to ask, and yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah. So I mean, so you had the four categories. How did you arrive at the four different categories?
I mean, statistically, mostly. So I what I did is I came up with, if you're creating a new scale, and there's no prior scales to go off of, which in this case there really wasn't. There was one scale from the 80s that was related, but had never been validated. And it was very narrow in scope. But basically what I did is based on the research I was doing and integrating all these different fields of research, I put together a list of 40 or 50 or 60 questions that I thought tapped into this central concept, had hundreds of people answer how true each one of these statements were to them, and then performed exploratory factor analysis to see, okay, did any of these kind of lump together in any meaningful way? And you do multiple iterations of that, and I mean, just what fell out of that, I guess, was these four categories, based on the assumption or the hypothesis that this was about danger or understanding threats.
So do the four categories kind of diverge in levels of interest between different people, or
they can, yeah, but they tend to, they correlate at something like, I forget now, 0.3 or so, 0.4, which is how a scale with multiple factors should correlate. That you don't want too much overlap, or else you're just measuring the same thing. You don't want them to be too different, or else you're not measuring a cohesive concept.
Right.
So they tend to correlate it, around 0.3 or 0.4 with each other. Each of them has pretty high internal reliability, and then when you look at it, you can certainly get someone who scores high on one and low on the other, but typically people score, directionally the same on all of them.
And have you found certain cultures deal with curiosity better or differently, or yeah?
I mean, I haven't done the research myself, but you can look at how different genres fare in different cultures. So in Mexico, for example, horror is a huge genre, and of course they have Dia de los Muertos and are very open about death, and in a way that in the US we're not. But I haven't done, I mean, the scale's been translated into multiple languages, but only some of those have been published so far. So yeah, I'm not sure. Certainly there's differences in how people deal with it. So I would imagine there's going to be cultural differences in how people score, and also maybe even what those scores mean in relation to other personality traits or pathologies even.
So just discussing these ideas with other people, somebody mentioned the idea that if you don't have enough threats, it's I didn't know if this is valid or not, but the idea that if you start becoming more and more sensitive because kind of your threat detector is looking for a threat.
Yeah, like there's a baseline degree to which you're searching for something, and if it's not there, you actually turn up your vigilance mechanisms to search harder for it. Yeah, there's some validity to that. I think if you were to ask, how does morbid curiosity relate to uncertainty in your environment or danger in your environment, it's probably somewhat of maybe a curvilinear relationship to some extent, where if you have absolutely no danger, you might not be curious about it at all. If you have mostly no danger, but you know that danger exists out in the world because you're seeing it online or you're hearing about it on the news, you might be very curious about it because you're not experiencing, but other people are. And so, what are you missing?
Right.
If you know your world is clearly dangerous, and you have to interact with it every day, then you don't really need a lot of fictional material or imaginative material to help you understand what things might look like, because maybe you've seen it in the real world, right?
Right.
But it's nobody's really done that research, and so I don't really know the answer to that. And I can speculate, but I don't really know the answer to that question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it boggles my mind that your scale is only 5 years old,
Yeah.
published. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an interesting question. Is there some sort of time component to it, either seasonally or I guess we we watch scary movies at night for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, there are certain environmental aspects that make things scarier, right? So that's one of the things I've been researching more recently is how do we define horror as a genre? How do we tell a scary story? What are the components of a scary story?
Right.
And one of those is darkness, because darkness, dull. We're very visual creatures, primarily visual primates. And so darkness, of course, dulls our strongest sense and makes us more vulnerable, which tends to make things more horrifying.
Right. Is there a manifestation of morbid curiosity when it comes to the spiritual religious life? Fan fiction of specific punishments for sins comes to mind.
For sure, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, it's not a coincidence that most religions have something bad that happens to you if you don't do what you're supposed to do, right? And those tend to be very imaginative and how they deal with punishment. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm thinking gothic horror and various types of, gargoyles, etc.
I mean, even classic fairy tales like Grimm's fairy tales, the classic ones were very, very gruesome compared to the modern versions we have. Classic religions, like older religions, were much more gruesome than more modern versions of those religions. So yeah, I think we've sanitized things a bit, but myth and religion are very, very driven by morbid curiosity.
So is the sanitizing good, or can it backfire?
In the case of like myth or religion, it's probably not good or bad necessarily. I think that people in the past, had to deal in the real world with things that were a lot worse than what we deal with, and so it probably didn't seem so extreme to them. So probably as things have gotten better for us, we've sanitized those aspects of mythology and religion a little more.
Mm-hmm. Is there any sort of possibility of traumatizing yourself with this type of stuff?
Sure. I mean, yeah, you could certainly overdo it, just like you can overdo anything, even healthy things, right? You can exercise too much. You can drink too much water. You can have too much of anything is not a good thing. Especially too much of anything to the exclusion of other things, right? You can think of it like a diet. Like there's a lot of things that are really good for you in your diet, but if you have those to the exclusion of other things that might be good for you, it warps your sense of what food might be like and what nutrition should be like. And the same is true of your interests and your curiosity and your entertainment preferences.
Mm-hmm. Any correlation with losing senses, deaf, or blind?
Oh, interesting. Like I've never thought of that. Yeah, I don't know. That again, great question to ask. I mean, there's a very terrifying horror movie called Hush about a woman who's deaf and she's being stalked by someone outside of her house. And one reason the film is terrifying, at least to someone who has their hearing, is that you're trying to imagine, like, well, what would I do if I couldn't hear someone who was stalking me? It again takes away a primary sense, which makes a lot of situations even scarier because you're even more vulnerable.
Yeah. I mean, you really have me wondering, in terms of, research that I'm wondering why we haven't done, in terms of people with comorbidities again. It's
just
like
time and money. There's a million questions you could ask, and not $1 million to ask them. And
yeah,
so,
yeah. Well, I guess you could do a GoFundMe or hope the NIH does
yeah,
does that for you. But you did say you did it with generalized anxiety. Um, I'm just wondering, depression, schizophrenia,
yeah,
especially.
suicidal ideation. I mean, there's lots of things that matter a lot that could be informed by this for sure.
PTSD. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and there's some interesting stuff with self-triggering that like uh, Benjamin Belay and some other people have done. They haven't used morbid curiosity explicitly, but I've talked with the researchers in that area, and I think we're kind of in agreement that a lot of this is related to morbid curiosity. So a lot of times people with PTSD will self-trigger, some remind themselves of intentionally of things that have traumatized them, and in some cases it tends to work out, in other cases it doesn't. And so I think this could shed a lot of light on why people do that and why it works for some people and not for others.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just thinking the military might be interested in correlation with resilience to PTSD.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was
Yeah,
being witnessing combat,
yeah.
etc.
Easy DoD grant, I would think. Department
Yeah,
of Defense grant.
get writing, Dr. Scrivner. I want the answers. I want the answers. Any correlation with Big Five?
Not as much as you would think, which is what actually convinced me that it was a standalone trait. So Big Five tends to explain a lot of variation in everyday behaviors for people. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And every time I've ever looked at this with Big Five, there's sometimes like a slight negative correlation with conscientiousness, but only with certain parts of like certain aspects of conscientiousness. Sometimes a slight negative relationship with agreeableness, but I'm talking like R values of 0.15, explaining very little variance. Openness, occasionally a positive correlation, which would make sense if it's tapping into curiosity more broadly, and an openness to new experiences, which is the trait itself. But the correlations are never more than, I would say, 0.2 the most. So it's, explaining 10% of the variance in those scores.
Are you familiar?
Go ahead.
You familiar with Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations?
I am. I haven't looked at it in relation to moral foundations. That'd be a great thing to look at. I may have looked at it in relation to disgust sensitivity, psychopathy, all kinds of other traits, but nothing has ever correlated with morbid curiosity scores more than, I think at the most was like 0.5 maybe for rebelliousness. Which
Rebelliousness.
Yeah, well, I mean, that kind of makes sense because if something in your culture is taboo, typically it's taboo because your culture says it's dangerous for you, right? So if you're more likely to be a rebel, you're also more likely, at least in our culture, to be seeking out things that are potentially dangerous, information about things that are dangerous. Rebelliousness probably also correlates with age a bit negatively. And so there's probably some overlap there, but one of the studies I did early on was I threw in every scale I could think of that might explain morbid curiosity. So I had I had a psychopathy scale, like a non-clinical psychopathy scale. I had Big Five. I had age and sex. I had disgust sensitivity and various aspects of that. I had the 5 dimensions of curiosity from Todd Kashdan, and I threw all of this into a model. And all of these things together only explained about half the variance in morbid curiosity. But that's across 20 subscales, which again made me fairly confident that I was measuring something distinct and something that is real because it's related to these other things, but in such a way that it's not explained by them. So yeah, it seems to be a somewhat distinct, even from other measures of curiosity, it seems to be somewhat distinct.
Is it? Do you think it's genetic?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, every trait has some genetic component, or everything we do has some genetic component because we are genetic creatures.
Right.
But if you're asking, do I think it can change over your lifetime based on your environment? Yeah, I think also it can change based on your environment and what you're exposed to. And it should. It should be um, it should be triggered under certain environmental conditions more than others. But the baseline is probably, somewhat set, just like your baseline agreeableness or your baseline neuroticism or your baseline extroversion is somewhat set, but it doesn't mean that it can't change under certain environmental situations or even social contexts.
Do you know if there's a neurological correlation, like certain brain areas, I guess, would be more excited under?
Yeah, weirdly, there has been one study on that. You would think that would come much later, but there was a study looking at what they operationalized as morbid curiosity. I think the authors and I would probably disagree a little bit about the specific way that they operationalized it, but I think it's still a pretty good study. And what they found was that it was related to sort of seeking behaviors, dopamine activation, in the same way that general curiosity was, or general pleasure in response to material is. Which, yeah, again, makes sense, right? It's going to cause you to seek out something or promote your seeking of something, seeking of information about the thing. I tend to think that neurological studies are very shiny, but they don't always offer a lot of insight into what's going on. They're shiny and fun, and they feel robust, but they're not always more informative than something simpler can be.
Right. Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time. I really enjoyed listening to you on The Hidden Brain. Have you been on other podcasts, other things we could go looking for?
Too many to count. I guess big ones recently. I was on All Things Considered on NPR. I actually did two Hidden Brains. I don't know if the other one has come out yet. Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard. I did Jordan Harbinger's show. I think that came out recently. Multiple. If you go to my website, there's a media section, and it's got magazine and newspaper articles that I've been interviewed for, but then also there's a section on podcast and video interviews.
Joe Rogan, here you come.
That'd be fun. I feel like he would. He's certainly interested in the topic. Between Fear Factor and his MMA stuff and his interest in aliens, I think he's kind of broadly interested in morbidly curious topics.
Yeah, that's another thing I didn't think of. Combat sports. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of the core one, right? I mean, that's definitely related to the violence subscale.
Right. Okay. Anything else you wanted to add as we conclude?
No, I mean, thanks. It was a great interview. Great chat. I've got a Substack called Morbidly Curious Thoughts, where I kind of write about things like ideas that I have that either don't have the funding to do or don't have the time to do myself, or sometimes ideas on there end up turning into projects that I work on. But that's kind of the first place that I just write about ideas related to this that I'm thinking about. Yeah, cool. It's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe I put a link to everything in the description. Dr. Coltan Scrivner, thank you everyone for joining us, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.